So many individual acts of heroism there. Joining me now from New Haven, Connecticut, Matthew Schmidt is a professor of national security and political science at the University of New Haven. Thanks for being with us. What do you think the Russians are doing here? At the negotiating table, they claim they will de-escalate, that they will draw down their troops, and then minutes later, they start renewed shelling, bombing, and targeting of civilian infrastructure in many cases around the capital. What are they doing?
I think we need to understand that war is about using military force and the threat of military force to change political outcomes. And I think that's what you see happening here with Vladimir Putin and Russian forces is they continue to use terror. They continue to increase the brutality of the war against the Ukrainian population, the civilian population, in order to shift, what they hope the negotiating standards would be of Zelensky as we go forward. That is to say, to take more of what they want, to get Crimea in negotiations, to get the whole of the Donbass instead of just the currently occupied territories, the NATO question and so forth. But they are using brutality in order to drive the political situation.
But what about these reports of, in some cases, Russian troops refusing to obey orders? In one case, we understand, according to intelligence reports, perhaps even accidentally shooting down one of their own aircraft. There are some videos circulating online of Russian troops hitchhiking away from their positions because they just do not want to fight this fight. What impact does that have overall on the Russian war effort?
It's hard to say because this is fundamentally an information war where the kinetic war is driving the information war, really. So you have these
Mhm.
incidences. It's very clear that you have a morale problem within the Russian military, perhaps all the way up into the Ministry of Defense, in Russia. But at the same time, what really matters is what people think is going on, what they perceive is happening on the battlefield. So it only takes enough troops to commit brutalities to frighten enough of the Ukrainian population to change Zelensky's position at the negotiating table. And even though there are Russian troops that may or may not be shooting on their own aircraft, that doesn't mean that the Chechen mercenaries that come in or the Syrian mercenaries that come in either know about that or care about that. They would still be capable of engaging
Right.
in war crimes in order to again up the brutality and push the negotiating position forward.
And where do you think that stands, this negotiation, at this very early stage, about 1 month into this Russian invasion? How is it shaping up on the diplomatic front here, in your opinion?
I think it's extremely fluid, as we've seen here, with words saying one thing and then actions, being another. And the thing people need to understand is that Ukraine is a parliamentary republic. And Zelensky has said over and over again that any question about negotiations, about the future of the territorial integrity of the country, about NATO ascension, these sorts of things has to go to a national referendum. And I think people just wave their hands and they think that, well, if Vladimir Putin can say X is going to happen and then X happens for Russia, Zelensky can't do that. And he won't do that because he's fighting for democratic principles here. But when you look at the
Sure.
Ukrainian population, right, just 2 weeks ago, there was some polling done, and almost 70% of the population essentially said, we'll fight on. We don't want to give up the whole of the Donbass, right? They even said, we don't want to give up
Yeah.
Crimea and we don't want to give up NATO. So it is very unclear that Zelensky could even pass through the negotiating positions we've been talking about for the last week.
Right. Well, obviously, when a democracy is engaged in a battle with an autocracy with no accountability to citizens, it's an uneven fight in that sense, as you described that so well. What about the timeline? Because when the Russians made those statements that they would de-escalate around Kyiv, there was a wave of optimism around the world. I mean, oil prices went down and the markets went up, and people sort of took Russia at its word. But is it possible that this is just a strategy, a lie, to prolong the situation on the ground so that they can reposition troops, and that really we should expect a very long-term battle here?
Unfortunately, Hala, that's where I think we're at. Often the outside world, I think, dismisses Zelensky, dismisses his cabinet as knowing their enemy better than we do. but I think that they do, and they understand what's going on here between the military fight and the political fight. And so, what you see here is that there's no downside to Putin to negotiate in bad faith and then to try to increase the brutality and the pressure on Zelensky. He's pushing Zelensky into a position where Zelensky has to look out and say, essentially, these are the Ukrainians that are alive still today, right? And I'm responsible for them. And how much do I want to save those lives that are alive today versus future Ukrainians in 20 or 40 years that want to live in a country with real independence, with real security, right? With a real European style economy and European values. He's got to
Yeah.
weigh that. That's not an easy decision. And every time Putin murders another Ukrainian civilian, he increases the chance that Zelensky will turn around and say, enough, I have to save people now. I can't keep this fight going. But that's what the referendum's for, too.